Alrighty. And yeah, just a reminder, I will send out a copy of this recording with some supporting materials out to everybody who attended today.
And on that same note, I will also let you know that there is just a very short resource document that will also be provided along with the recording at the end of the session this morning. And I'll mention it throughout what's actually included in that resource document, because there are some additional things, of course, beyond what we can do in just an hour, right? We could probably take this topic and go on for days and days and weeks because it's such an important topic and there's so many things to take into consideration. But for the purpose of today, let's move forward and see if I can get my presentation to move forward here. There we go. This is actually where we're going today. So again, equity and access is one of the main focus points of the conversation today. And in thinking about equity and access, we're going to talk about some strategic grouping structures. You'll see as we work our way through that there are tools and resources, and we're just touching on some ideas today. But one of those is the strategic grouping structures. We're also going to be talking about some of the learning tasks and what multiple entry points means when we're talking about a learning task and access for our students. And finally, we're going to be talking about some of our learning conversations and how do we provide for equity and access in some of those classroom conversations that we're designing and that we're leading. So this is the direction we're headed in this morning. And on our next slide, you will see that I am going to ask you to come into that conversation mode. So here we are, we're all joined together here this morning. We have a nice group of educators and professionals, and we're all talking about equity. But equity has been very prominent in discussions around teaching and learning, particularly in the last year or 2 years. It's been there for a lot longer, I appreciate, but it's becoming more and more under the spotlight. And as it's discussed, it becomes more evident that there are lots of different conceptions about what equity means. So when I say equity, what does that mean to you? This is not rhetorical. I would very much appreciate if some of you would come off mute and sort of join into the conversation with us this morning. What does equity mean?
When I think of equity, and I know my definition is limited just because of how I've been raised and where I work today. But when I think of equity, I think of students having really equal access to my content. And I know sometimes I don't even know how to do that or if that's happening, but that's what I think of is students just have equal access to the content that I am responsible for presenting.
Thank you. Great. Appreciate you jumping in. Who else? Someone else jump in. What does equity mean to you? There's no right or wrong. We're just talking about the different varied conceptions here.
I think it just means everybody gets what they need when they need it. Some students need more than other students, or they need something in a different way. So as long as they all get to the final point, so it looks different for everybody, but it's when all students get what they need when they need it.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, it makes sense to me. I'm all with you there. I think they're both right, that students have access, that everyone's getting what they need. In the past, and I'll date myself, I think a lot of us as educators came back and said, well, we'll provide equity by what? Differentiated instruction, right? Wasn't that the buzzword? And again, dating myself, I appreciate that, but providing equity. One more person, somebody else who'd like to jump in and share with what they think equity means.
I want to go off of what Jennifer just said. And I am going to date myself. I've been through the rings of everything for 31 years now. I believe that equity isn't necessarily equal access or equal in any way. Equity just means that, as Jennifer mentioned, it's providing the end product so that everyone can get there. And so equity means that there's an opening spot, or that there is, everyone has the ability to get to where they need to be. And so equity is, I guess it's the stepping stones are provided at different levels for each one. So I really appreciate what Jennifer had to offer there, because there's a difference between equity and equalness, and those are different. And so I try to present that to the students in my class, that everybody has the chance to get to the end product, but that everybody needs a little different steps or different help to get to the same end point.
Okay, thank you for that. And I love the visual of your stepping stones. When you said that, I could picture my classroom and my own kids, each taking a different path on these stepping stones, sort of across the stream here to get to where they needed to be on the other side. Thank you all very much for contributing to that. I am actually now going to share with you a quick 60-second excerpt from a piece by Dr. Tyrone Howard. If you're not familiar with Dr. Howard, that is one of the resources that will be coming to you following this recording. I offered some links where you could actually go on and check him out, and some of the other topics that he discusses. But he had a fascinating childhood and opportunity growing up, and he shares in this little video or audio, it's just an audio clip. He shares in this audio clip a little bit about his idea behind equity. So I'm going to go ahead and click this and hope that, that everything will play the way I want it to.
Kathy, I'm not hearing anything.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you speaking up. Here, I'm listening to it, thinking all of you are hearing it. And it's not happening, huh? Okay. Well, I'm going to approach this a different way. I had a backup plan. So thank you for jumping in. We would have just continued to sit there for about another 20 seconds. I am going to take another approach here. And if you cannot hear something in the next 20 seconds or so, please let me know.
I tend to think of equity as being something different from equality. I've oftentimes thought about equity as being sort of the ways in which we meet people where they are. And really, I see it as different from equality, where equality says we're going to give everyone the same thing. Equity says we're going to give people what they need. And that may mean that there are some communities or some students who are warranted or in need of more time, more resources, more support than others are. So it's not about a fairness issue. It's about trying to be mindful of the historical sort of way in which opportunities and advantages have been spread out across respective communities. It's about understanding sort of historical disadvantages. It's about understanding the kinds of privileges afforded to some communities compared to others. So equity is really about trying to give disproportionate types of, paying attention to disproportionate types of realities that certain groups have faced.
Could you hear that? Yes?
Yes.
Yay. Okay, good. I assumed silence was an affirmative there. So yay. So you got the idea behind what Dr. Howard was saying, and he was saying just what so many of you had said, that equity is really not just about equality, but that it's about meeting someone where they are, right? And as classroom teachers, and as I'm sure a lot of you are presenters and working with groups of teachers in other opportunities, we very much try to come in and meet our students where they are. And that's what equity from his definition is about. Again, I will share some resources at the end of this that you'll have some other opportunities to hear more from Dr. Howard, but a fascinating idea behind that. Okay, so as we move forward, let's take our thoughts about equity and what Dr. Howard mentioned there and connect it to our work as teachers, right? So we get it. Equity is meeting students where we are. So when we're connecting that idea with our students, we really as teachers may connect that through planning and designing their learning experiences, right? So when we sit down to create our lesson plans, regardless of our approach on that, this is something that we need to take into consideration, how to best meet students where they are. And especially with this last year, you can imagine with things going on with COVID and all the other things, it's not necessarily just those areas that may come to mind first, as far as historical background or demographics or those things. This year puts a whole new twist on it, doesn't it? With all that the students have been through with the pandemic, learning from home, being at home, struggles with health, all of those other things that have gone on in their world this year. There are lots of things to consider when we're talking about now meeting students where they are. It's changed drastically from last year, meeting students where they are. So let's take an analogy of a body of water. You see on the screen there just a big drop coming in. And if that center of that body of water, whether it's a pool or a lake or whatever, it's got a border. If that center is our instruction, our students are scattered all over the lake.
Muchas gracias. Bye. Excuse me, thank you.
I'm sorry, I think somebody's off mute. Okay, we're good. So the students are scattered all over the water, right? And they're maybe even up on the bank. And they're all over because of what? Different backgrounds, different opportunities, different situations, different environment over the last year, so lots of students scattered across the water. And when we're thinking about the learning opportunities and creating instruction for those students across the lake, think about our instruction as the pebbles or the rocks. The smaller the pebble, the fewer ripples, the fewer students it impacts, right? The larger the rock, the greater the ripples. The greater the ripples go out across the lake and the more impact upon more students. So we're reaching more and more students. So I want you to sort of keep this visual in mind as we start to talk about some of the specifics with accessibility and opportunity. And keep in mind, and you heard Dr. Howard say it as well as some of your peers here on the session, that just because something is accessible doesn't necessarily make it equitable. So being equal and offering everybody the same thing is not necessarily equity. And we'll take a look at that. And please interrupt with any questions along the way. We're going to do some more interaction here in just a moment. So when it comes to equity, there are lots of things to consider. You heard Dr. Howard mention some. These are the ones that I was thinking of as we came up with this topic and we were starting to discuss the possibilities and the value of the topic. Some of the factors that impact our equity are identity, achievement, access, historic disadvantage. You heard Dr. Howard mention that, disproportionate impact, and our environment. particularly our environment most recently. So, time for you to think again. During the next few minutes of learning, we're going to operate from our equity stance and examine our current practices around grouping students. Keeping in mind that you might need to make some adjustments. Okay, but I want you to think about this question on the screen. Across a week or a month or a unit, what do you take into consideration when you're grouping students? So when you're creating groups in your classroom, I'm not necessarily talking about how you create them, but what are you thinking about when you're making decisions about where students should be grouped? So I'm going to give you just a minute to think about this, and then I would love for someone to join into the conversation whenever you're ready.
Well, currently I'm working with elementary students, and I tend to group them according to their reading levels and their personalities. That tends to play a big part on how the students are grouped.
I love that, with the personality. So tell me more about that. Why personalities? I agree with you, ability. I think all of us as teachers at some point in our classrooms do some type of ability grouping, and we're going to talk about some strategies for that. But talk to me about your personality grouping. I love that.
Well, sometimes I switch my students up. I'm known at my school as the teacher that always moves her classroom around, because I don't like students to get too comfortable with the same group all the time. So I give them about a week staying with the same group, and then I mix them up because they need to know every group in the class. But I try to put a quiet student maybe with a louder student, or two quiet students together to see what they can produce, so that they get a chance to learn to talk, because their voice needs to be heard. And two very boisterous students, so that they get to hear each other, and then male and female, just different personalities, because I really get to know my students. I try to anyway, so that it's a safe environment. That's just part of being in the safe environment, I feel like. So it comes down to just having a voice.
Very nice. And creating that culture in your classroom. Congratulations on those efforts. That's excellent. Yeah, that's wonderful. Someone else jump in. Anybody else on grouping? What do you take into consideration when you're grouping your students? What do you think about?
I consider a number of the same things. I think it was Shelley that was talking. I definitely look at trying to put a leader in a group, so that I know there's somebody that will, and then I will actually ask them, I'd like you to moderate this group sometimes. Sometimes I'll do that and say, I'd like you to make sure everybody gets to talk, and they usually seem to like that. I try, and sometimes I do, if I have, you always have students that will just talk the entire time. And so for those kids who are quiet, they love to be there because they don't have to say anything. So I will try to mix it up. And I teach math and science. So I try to make sure there's somebody in the group that has a handle on the concept and can do some peer teaching. I don't like to put a whole group of kids that don't have any idea what's going on together, because that's frustrating for them. So it kind of depends on what I'm doing. There are times I want to put 3 strong math students together and see how they can handle each other. But I don't like putting 3 or 4 weak students together, because that's just demoralizing for them. So, but I do look at leadership ability, how quiet they tend to be, and then how comfortable they are with the content.
Great strategies as well. both examples, excellent examples of the strategies that can be incorporated. And I know a lot of us are doing so many of those things. These, according to the research, are actually some of the critical questions that may be applied when you're thinking about grouping. So I'm going to give you a minute just to take a quick look. We won't ponder too long. Some of these are going to sound very familiar because you just heard them already being put into practice. But if you come across one or two that you think, wow, I don't do that really, you might want to take note of that. Just something you might want to try in the upcoming months as we get back to school. For so many of us, we're going back all face to face. We'll be with our students and we'll have these opportunities. I will share as we move to the next slide. I think one of my favorites that it gets me every time I look at these types of questions is the one that says, how will I know if my approach to student groups worked? Okay, and how will students offer their feedback? So how will they let me know if it's worked or it hasn't worked? Because I, like so many of you, change it up all the time, right? We don't want to group for just one reason or just two. They need to know everyone and learn to work together. But these are the questions that, again, according to research, have been identified as critical questions when developing those groups. And in doing that, here are some additional tips. So grouping students by ability. We won't spend a lot of time on that topic, but I will tell you now that it can be very controversial. I know when I started, again, dating myself for any of you who've taught any length of time, when we started, we had reading groups that were the bluebirds and the ladybugs and you know, whatever the other groups were, but we definitely grouped according to ability and reading level. And at that time, when I started, that was pretty much all we grouped for. They stayed in those groups forever until the Bluebird book was done. So it's nice to think about other options though. And I will share with you John Hattie, Hattie, and again, some of his information will be in the resources at the end. His research actually showed that ability grouping has a very insignificant impact. Significant impact in his studies is about a 0.4, so 4/10. Ability grouping came out at 1.12. So statistically, the significance for ability grouping is just one of those little teeny rocks. Okay, the ability grouping is just barely sending ripples out, according to Hattie's research, when a lot of those other strategies may be a larger rock. Okay, for example, the effect size of cooperative grouping and learning versus individual learning. Cooperative groups were shown to have a huge, significant impact, 0.56 of a significance, which is important to keep in mind if we're thinking about dropping those big rocks that send those ripples all the way over to the edge of the lake, all the way to the bank, right? So cooperative grouping, collaborative grouping, all of those types of things. And you'll notice here where it says strategic grouping tips, be mindful of the group size. 3 to 5 is a target range. Some people, several of you mentioned those quiet students. They're not going to speak up in a larger group. So just things to keep in mind. So we are going to continue. Again, I won't get into the discussion about ability grouping because it can consume us, but we'll continue. And for the purpose of our learning and growth today, we'll kind of stick with this philosophy on the screen here. This strategy works well when I'm trying to achieve this. Because those of you who spoke out confirmed for us that we don't always group for the same reason. We have different reasons to group and different rationales. I mentioned the ability grouping. Now, I just said that it doesn't have a huge impact, but there is a way, what's called alternate ranking. This is a way that suggests that if you are going to ability group, which I think for those of us as teachers, as classroom teachers, if you are going to maintain your sanity at all, sometimes we need to ability group. That's just the way things are. We need to be able to give different instruction, right? Equity doesn't just mean hitting those students that need additional support. Equity also means providing the resources and opportunities to extend learning. So alternate ranking is a type of ability grouping that puts you within a moderate range. And I just wanted to share this one quick example. So you would do some type of data gathering with your classroom, whatever it is, formal or informal. And if you had, I'll just say I have 32 students in my room, and I would number rank my entire class. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, all the way down to 32, based upon this data. And no, it's not perfect. And no, I'm not going to dwell on it because nobody has that kind of time, right? It's going to be very sort of down and dirty. We're going to do some type of observation or some type of a quick check, and we're going to rank our entire class. Then we're going to divide the class in half. So I have 1 to 16 and 17 to 32. And then to create my ability groups, I'm actually going to take the top 2 from each of those halves. And I'm only going to create groups with 4 students. So I'm going to take students 1 and 2 and students 17 and 18 and put them in a group. Then I'm going to take students 3 and 4 and students 19 and 20 and put them in a group. And that's what's considered a moderate range ability grouping. And it's an easy strategy, super easy. Again, don't overthink it. If you haven't done it, I encourage you to try it. Again, not perfect, not exact, but definitely works. Questions on that? We're all good? Again, crickets mean we're all good. Okay, so individual and group accountability. When we're in groups, it's important for students to, at your point, and several of you mentioned, have a voice. Some of them may come back and say, I don't want to work in a group. I would rather work independently. But we all know that that social interaction is also something that needs to be acquired and learned in a lot of cases. Engaging in the academic content, that's a big rock in our pond, okay? So start small, encourage your students to think about what they can bring to the group. And if it's not something that you currently do when you're establishing groups, I would encourage you, especially at the beginning of the year, talk to your class. How can you contribute to a group? We're going to divide into groups for the next activity. What can each of you bring to that group? And I can guarantee that if they're like my students, I had students sitting there saying, well, I can't take anything to the group because I don't know this stuff and I don't speak up and I don't have any friends. This is my group. I mean, I'm telling you this, I can hear my students. Okay. So to have that conversation that says everyone contributes, what do you contribute? So we're going to take just a minute here. I'm going to ask you to think, what ways can students be encouraged to contribute in your groups? I gave you one example. They can ask questions of others to support their thinking. So if they're not sure what they're supposed to be learning, or if they're not sure what their understanding is correct, they can ask questions. And some of you said, you know, some of you had mentioned, I try to put some kids together where somebody knows some of it so that not everyone is asking, gosh, we don't know what we're talking about. None of us know what we're talking about. So this middle of the road grouping, this moderate ability grouping, okay, that can help with that. What other kinds of contributions might you ask your students to make? Keep in mind, I can't see you, so you have to prove to me that you're still out there.
Okay, well, I'll talk again. I'm
That's
obviously
okay.
I'm
That's
obviously
okay.
the student that always has something to say.
That's
So
okay.
that was never my problem. But I do have students that sometimes I'll ask them to maybe be the write down, like the scribe, be the scribe for the group. And then that allows them to do something but be kind of quiet. Maybe draw a picture or be a part of drawing on the poster if that's their strength, is art or drawing. Like I said, I'll ask someone to be the moderator if I know that they're good at drawing people in, or I want to make sure that they don't do all the talking, but have to take responsibility to get other kids to talk.
Nice,
Those are a couple.
very nice. Sounds a lot like some of those reciprocal teaching strategies, right? That we incorporate into our group processes. Somebody else like to contribute? Thank you so much. I appreciate you jumping in. Crickets are difficult, right? When you're on the other end and you can't see anybody.
Pamela, I'm right along with you. I was never the quiet one. So I'm going to add 2. And again, I'm with elementary school right now. I have active listening and I teach that right away. So partner A and partner B. So the students each have one's an A and one's a B. And so they actively listen to what one says and then they restate it. I heard you say. So it gives them how to say something in complete sentences as well. And then they kind of re-say it, so they can write it down first and then they re-say it to each other. And they start off with giving them stems, so sentence stems, so they can fill it out about something we either watched or we did, or it could be something as simple as just something they did over the weekend, but just to get them to talk. Nice. And it could be with only, a group can be 2 people. Doesn't have to be a whole lot, and it develops over time. It's like anything, riding a skateboard or a bike. I always use that example. You didn't start off knowing how to ride a bike first off, you had to practice. So speaking in a group sometimes takes practice. So we learn it that way. It has to be comfortable for students. So starting off with partner A, partner B, and then they switch, and everything has to be kind of shown to them because they're just, 8, 9 years old. So teaching them then, so you can even do that with high school students, partner A, partner B, and then they learn how to get a little more comfortable, maybe as an idea.
Love that strategy. All of the strategies are great, and incorporating a lot of good ideas, and you'll see some of those actually come back in our conversation. Again, a lot of the ideas for primary can certainly be incorporated, or elementary, I should say, can certainly be incorporated into the upper grades, middle school and high school as well. We have those same skills and those same needs as our students grow older. So appreciate all those conversation and thought starters. So we have taken a little bit of a look at our grouping. So whether your learning opportunity is designed with collaborative groups or partnerships or individuals, let's start thinking about our tasks now and providing tasks that have multiple entry points. It's an important way to improve student access and to allow equity. So think about this. Now, this for me, I will share with you, when I first started to get into this topic of equity, and I really became enthusiastic about it about 3 years ago, or maybe close to 4 years ago now. This was something that took me some time to incorporate, but love the idea behind it. So we're thinking about learning tasks. Okay, I'm going to now show you, this is math comparison. This is an elementary example. So the first example at the top is the existing, probably what we do existing, okay? Which shows the same value as 700 plus 50 plus 6. Pretty common question in our elementary grades for math instruction, right? And they're learning how to pick the ones that put it together. What does it look like? They're learning all those good things. Now, if we're talking about multiple entry points, okay, how does it become more accessible if you use a starter with that question? And believe me, this takes training with your students as well. Which description below does not belong? and why. So they could look at that with all kinds of different things. They could say, well, the middle one doesn't belong. Why? Because the words are written out. Okay, that's one thing. The one on the bottom doesn't belong. I mean, they could go through any types of examples of why it doesn't belong. Call out things that are different. Call out things that are the same. But you see the opportunity to say there's more than one answer, right? More than one answer. I have multiple entry points to this question. So when we're talking about providing equity, it really needs to include not every question, every time, every minute, every day, but it really needs to include something beyond which shows the same value. You've got one answer, yes or no, right or wrong, good or bad, that's it. It really needs to provide multiple entry points to the question. And it does take training for your students, but I will share with you that once your students get the idea, they love it. Because everyone has something to contribute, right? Which one doesn't belong? They could say, well, the top one doesn't belong because it has the addition symbols in it and the other ones don't. I mean, everyone can have some kind of input. Make sense? I'm going to take crickets as affirmative. Okay, let's
Well,
look.
I'm sorry, I do have a
Yeah.
question.
Sure.
So the top one, the existing content example, there's an actual, I mean, there is an actual answer to that.
Yes.
But the bottom one, you're saying you're just looking for conversation. You're not looking for an actual answer. Those are two different, like, I don't
I am
see how the
looking-
bottom one is this is.
Yeah. I am
Okay.
looking for conversation and I'm looking for an actual answer because that's just the teacher in me, right? So if you were looking at this and I said to you, which one does not belong? Most of us would pick the middle one because 700s and 6 ones is not 756.
Right.
Right? So we would get that. And I would lead my class to getting that answer. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But
So
in the process of getting to that answer, everyone can contribute. If I leave this with my class and I lead the discussion and I say, which one does not belong? And I will have kids that say, one has words in it. One has plus, you're right. And we're going to keep going and we're going to keep talking and we're going to keep looking at it. We're going to keep discussing it. And eventually somebody's going to say, the one on the top and the one on the bottom are equal. And I'm going to say, that's right. So,
okay,
see
so
where I'm going?
yes, on my screen, I only see 2 answers to the bottom question.
Kathy, I
So-
think there's a problem there that we use these at our school. Your 2 there are not connected as far as when you're showing this, your second one down there that says which description does not belong and why, it's not clear to the other participants. Are you telling them that 700 plus 50 plus 6 is a possible part of this problem, or is just what description does not belong and why? Because in the way that it's presented here, which shows the same value as 700 plus 50 plus 6 is not included in that. So at our district, we don't have that first, which shows the same value as 700 plus 50 plus 6, and it's not on your slide as well. So we just have which description does not belong and why. So I see Pamela's confusion. On your question, would you have that which shows the same value as 700 plus 50 plus 6 on the part 2? That's her question, I believe. Am I correct, Pamela?
Yes.
I'm sorry, it's not showing accurately. And you know, that's right. One of the things we deal with as teachers on Zoom, because on my screen, down at the bottom, it says which description does not belong and why. And it says 700 plus 50 plus 6. And then below that, it says 700s written out and 6 ones. And then below that, it just has the number 756.
Oh, okay, so we don't have the 756 on, I don't see 756.
I apologize. Yeah.
That's okay.
Who knows where that is? Somewhere
No,
in
I see-
cyberspace. I'm
I
seeing it on
see
my side.
756, but the question is, at the existing content example, does which shows the same value as 700 plus 50 plus 6? Does that go along with the question, which description does not belong?
No, they're separate.
See, so that's, I think, where the confusion comes in.
Gotcha.
Because the first slide up at the top at our district, we would not even ever give that to them. So Pamela, to answer your question, you're absolutely right. They do ask two separate questions, but the students would come up with on their own as one of their answers. And you would then later ask, well, which one would say 700 plus 50 plus 6?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
So-
thank you.
I appreciate that so much, and I appreciate your jumping in. Conversation is key, correct, to learning. So I appreciate that. I did put up one more example. I'm not going to take time to go through it because I have a feeling it's going to be cut and pasted and kind of messy. But the point here was, which of these is an example of a metaphor was the question at the top, and it gave 3 responses. And then down below it said, can you tell me about this statement, which is always a metaphor, sometimes a metaphor, never, but I'm going to back up. So, right, we modify as we teach. The point being is, okay, let's come back to the point. We can skip over my examples, but the point being is asking the one answer only possibility questions is not the best approach at all times for our equity approach. Right? So if our goal is to provide equity, we need to provide something more within the process of it's right or it's wrong. Okay, it's good or it's bad. There needs to be an opportunity to have everyone contribute to the discussion. And these are just ideas of how you can start that conversation with a learning task. Does that make sense? I'm hoping better. I'm going to skip over my examples and come here. So, and it sounds like I know enough of the background that we don't need to address this question specifically, but thinking of a learning task or a series of tasks, I guess the ask would be, and this one can be rhetorical because I have a better understanding of your district, but the ask would be, try to incorporate multiple entry points. How can you modify a question to ensure that there are multiple entry points for discussion as well as an answer, a right answer? Okay, and that would be the question there. Okay, it got a little confusing with my examples again. They looked good on my end. So I apologize for that. Are there questions on modifying a learning task and the rationale or the goal behind it? Don't want to leave that if we're uncomfortable with that. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about grouping strategies and strategically grouping our students. We've talked a little bit, I'll bet confusing, a little bit about the learning tasks and multiple entry points into learning. And the last piece that I'd like to bring up for conversation this morning is tools to facilitate student conversations. And how can we facilitate student conversations when it relates to a learning task? So we are going to take a look at equitable learning conversations. And it's funny because I think we just called it out naturally within our own time together this morning. Some of you said, I've never been quiet. I, like you, have never been quiet. I was always the one to raise my hand. I was always the one to jump in, right or wrong. I was always the one to jump in and still am. But in equitable learning conversations, these are things that need to be considered. and that these are ways of thinking that are valued. Who's talking? What are they talking about? And in what ways are they talking? Are they just talking to one other student in the group, or are they talking to the whole group when they're having a conversation? What do students write down during a conversation? Or do they write anything down? What do they record? And why would they record it? And what kinds of questions in a learning conversation are important? So things to consider. Let's take a look. We understand as educators, as professionals, as teachers and administrators, that depending upon the learning modality, we are not going to necessarily hear from every student every day. But it's important to analyze the opportunities where students have to speak. Look at an entire week. Look at 2 weeks. I actually used to, but I'm a little compulsive at times. I actually used to keep a checklist of who spoke during the class sessions so that I could keep track of how often they were engaging, how often they were joining the conversation, or how often I was asking them to join the conversation. So the benefits of talk, I think we can all agree upon. Deeper understanding, language development, as we talk about our SEL students, social emotional skill development, clarifying misunderstandings as well as understanding, all of those good things incorporated. But there are strategies, and some of them have been mentioned already. This particular example, they are actually called talk moves. And purposeful talk moves include the following: helping individuals clarify, orienting themselves to others' thinking, helping students to deepen their own reasoning, and helping them to engage with the reasoning of others. So talk moves are just an example, and you've already demonstrated them. They're categorized by the purpose that they achieve. So one purpose may be to help students clarify and share their own thoughts. One purpose may be to help students think about what others are saying. I brought up a couple of examples, and coincidentally, they are examples that you've already incorporated. So one example of talk moves in action is that turn and talk or partner talk. In elementary, we used to call it think, pair, and share. At upper grade, or in elementary, either one, but in the upper grades, I often use the second example, which is say more. And it can be modified to tell me more or whatever works, right? But it's just a prompt. They give an answer and you're like, okay, tell me more. Tell me more. You've heard me do it a couple of times during our time together this morning. Tell me more about why you group your students that way. Tell me more about that. And those are all examples of talk moves and specific designs for conversation. And of course, we can't leave out all of our technology. So when we're thinking about talk moves, we want to bring those opportunities to life. And depending upon teaching and learning modalities, which are always shifting, right? Learning modalities are continually shifting. These talk moves can be hugely important to incorporate technology. So collaboration, we mentioned it earlier. Grouping, doing those classroom groupings, 8.82 significance. So this is a huge rock, okay? Talk moves, incorporating conversations. This is just some examples of ways to incorporate technology into some of our talk moves. Some of you may have other ways. I know our thing lately is we've been using Jamboards. If you're not familiar with Jamboards, super easy. Okay. I taught upper elementary for years and years, and I would have my students involved. Create a Jamboard that shows me what you're talking about. Create a Padlet. Create Google Slides. All of those things to be incorporated into our talk moves, into our grouping, and into our access for equity. Okay, these are just some more examples of the other ones. If you haven't used Mentimeter, Kahoot, Poll Everywhere is pretty common. I have not used back channel chat, but I have several peers that have, that say it's wonderful. So if you're not familiar, jot a couple down, and you may want to try them out as you get started at the beginning of the year. But here comes the question, yes? What challenges to access or equity is this going to bring up in my classroom? So I'm talking about technology. Who is left out? These can be rhetorical. We understand, right? Who might be marginalized? Students who don't have access to the internet at home. Although they may have tools from the school or the district, they have limited internet access at home. Or maybe they don't have the tools or the resources. Or there are lots of other combinations to that question. The idea behind this slide and the idea behind the question here is there are some possible solutions. If you have access to technology within your classroom and you have your students grouped in a purposeful way where they can help each other, they can work on some of these technology pieces in class. Okay, some of these talk moves can be done within our self-contained classrooms and not just beyond. So in thinking about an SEL informed approach, this is where we've been going today. Gather your resources, think about what you're doing, analyze with your grouping and all those good things, analyze your learning activities. And when you're sitting by yourself doing lesson plans, be critical. How am I providing equity? Meeting students where they are, not just equal access, but meeting students where they are. Add or adjust, replace. Think about those competencies that are provided by the state. And think about ways to facilitate your students. Again, I am offering, at the end, you will receive, along with the recording, some additional resources. I encourage you to take a look. They're all linked. So when you get the document, you can just click on the links and take a look at some of these other pieces. They include the researchers that I've mentioned today. So Dr. Hattie, John Hattie, and Tyrone Howard, they're included in these additional resources. And as a quick review, this is where we've been today. We talked about equity and access. We looked at our strategic grouping structures, how we group students, why we group students. We looked at our learning tasks and providing multiple entry points. That may be the one that is the most different in what you saw today. And we also reviewed equitable learning conversations. So I hope through this that you've gained some type of tactical or practical strategies for structuring student learning to best meet equity. And remember that as you're working in the upcoming months, getting ready for school, we cannot control, of course, everything that impacts our student learning. But we can control the impact of the learning opportunities that we design. So it is a way to start. We can control the learning opportunities that we present to our students. And that's what we were here to discuss today. Are there questions as we wrap up? Good, bad, and ugly?
Kathy, I have one question, if it's okay.
Of course.
The slides that you'll be sharing with us, is it okay if I share it with our assistant superintendent?
Yes, it is. Yep.
Right.
You will be receiving those from, I believe, Taylor or one of the coordinators will be sending those out along with the additional resource page.
Thank you so very much. And thank you very much for a very insightful day.
Oh, you're welcome. It's so much fun for me. I really could spend an entire day on it. An hour just seems a little bit limited, but hopefully everyone will walk away with at least some new ideas and maybe it sparked some new thinking. Thank you so much. I appreciate you being here. Have a wonderful day and a great beginning to the school year.
Thank you very much.